morning, everyone. Dear distinguished guests, Commissioner Andor, participants on the first session, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zoltán Szántó. I'm the Vice Rector for Education of Corvinus University of Budapest. First of all, in the name of Corvinus University of Budapest, I wish to extend a very warm welcome to everyone today, and thank you for coming here to the conference on the Roma participation, empowerment, and emancipation. For me, as with the conference we hosted on the Roma empowerment last year, this is a highlight of the year. This year has been what the Queen of England once described as an annus horribilis, which means a horrible year. At one stage last year it looked as if the Corvinus University would be broken up, and we passed that crisis. Now we navigate a new crisis, which is a founding crisis and is causing a huge upheaval, and so it is to grapple and wrestle with crisis in this age of austerity. At the same time, I take this opportunity to present a deep and profound apology on behalf of Corvinus University of Budapest. As some of you may be aware, Zeljko wrote a textbook to accompany a course at the Corvinus, which had an extremely offensive passage on the Roma community. It is encouraging that a number of students complained about the book in late 2011. I tried to contact the author, who was the ambassador to Norway, to inform him of the complaint with the hope of getting some kind of retraction and apology, but without success. I am afraid the leadership of the Corvinus, which includes myself, became distracted by the crisis, which threatened to close the university. However, in 2012, when Zeljko's comments became a matter of media and public debate, the university immediately decided to announce it did not support Zeljko's statement and opposed all form of racism. The Corvinus has always been noted as a leading liberal and progressive institution in this country. It is of paramount importance that this university survives and promotes tolerance and understanding. It is for that reason that we have fought hard to keep this institution alive and open, and are pleased to host this conference for the second year. I am also proud that at the Corvinus we have members of the Roma community teaching here and taking postgraduate, undergraduate and postgraduate courses. For Roma empowerment to be realized, we need to support Roma intellectual leaders and activists, and I'm pleased we are doing so. I believe very much in dialogue and deliberation, and I have established a commission to explore the Brzezinski case and prepare an expert assessment of his arguments. Even we plan to publish this academic note in the Corvinus Journal of Sociology and Social Policy soon. I hope he will be persuaded by reason and finally renounce the internationally recognized expertise that his comments in the book are wrong. The Corvinus University of Budapest strives to promote social justice. It is a community, and as with other communities, there may have been times when we have failed to promote equality for Roma, but we are trying to address this issue of fundamental importance. Moreover, we have a growing number of Roma studying with us and teaching, as I mentioned. We live in difficult times as witnessed by the signs of rising of xenophobia across Europe. Universities have an important role to play in promoting strong and inclusive research and tolerant values. I look forward to the debate today on the important subject of Roma empowerment, and wish you a fruitful conference at Corvinus in a pleasant state in Budapest. I do hope that we can host you next year in the 3rd Roma Empowerment Conference as well. Thank you very much for
your Thank you very much, Zoltán, for those words and for hosting us. My name is Ryder. I'm a teacher at Corvinus University. I'm also a researcher at the University of Bristol. I've seen the delegate list here today, and I'm really excited by the commitment that's in this room and the experience. But I'm also excited by the fact we've got some new people, students or people coming into this issue fairly new. And that excites me because we have an opportunity to inspire them and maybe persuade them to join us in the work that we're all doing in different fields. I'd just like to give you a bit of a context behind this conference. In 2010, my associates, Martin Rovid, Julius Rostus and Marius Tabar, we came together and we formed something called the Roma Research and Empowerment Network. The 4 of us, we have a record of activism and scholarship, and we wanted to fuse that. We wanted to promote in Hungary inclusive research and debates on empowerment. Now, another attraction to the Roma Research and Empowerment Network is we meet in some nice cafes and pubs, and it's a nice social event as well as a debate. And our meetings take place in the 8th district, and we provide a forum, I hope, where community members, practitioners and researchers can come together and learn from each other. We also organise conferences, and this is our 2nd conference at the Corvinus. Now, I was thinking back to the very first meeting we had of our network in a certain pub, and one of the questions that was raised was, do we need a talking shop? We're tired of talk that leads to nothing. And I can understand that, and that's criticism that's often directed at conferences on this issue. And in truth, there are some conferences that are sometimes very dry, very controlled, and Roma are pushed to the margins. At this conference, like with our network, we want the Roma voice to be centre stage. We also want this conference to be a deliberative space where people can say what they feel and speak with passion. And I would say, and I hope you agree with me, that we do need talk, but we need meaningful talk that will fuel and propel scholarship and activism, which will sustain us in our work, give us energy to carry on in the struggle, and that will capture our imagination and fire our motivation. But we also need concrete outputs, and there are a number of those that this conference will produce. For a start, we're going to film the opening addresses, and the Roma Virtual Network will be making the film available in due course. We will also be producing a summary note of this conference, some of the key questions raised, ideas for ways forward, and that will be circulated, and hopefully both of these things can have some influence. I think another key outcome, though, is we leave this hall at the end of the day with some new friends and comrades, ideas and inspiration, and we're ready and prepared for the future months of work that we have to do as researchers and activists. Okay, I would like to enter now into kind of school teacher mode, because I've got to chair this, and many years ago I was a school teacher, and I love you all very dearly, but I'm going to be very strict with you. And if you don't ask questions but make big long speeches, I'm going to have to interrupt you. To the presenters, if you go beyond your 10 minutes, I'm going to have to somehow wrestle with you away from the microphone. And I'm not very strong, but I do my best. So I'll very briefly introduce the very distinguished panel we have today. We have László Andor, the EU Commissioner for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion. We have Costel Bercus, Chair of the Board of the Roma Education Fund. Will Guy from the University of Bristol. Zeljko Jovanovic, Director of Open Society Foundation's Roma Initiatives Office. And of course Ágnes, Daróczi, and I've seen you many times on this in Budapest at meetings and events. And again, I extend a warm welcome to you with the others. So our first speaker is Costel. Costel, if you'd like to come here and present for us.
Andrew, you surprised me, I have to say, because I was waiting my turn after Commissioner Andor, but I'm very glad to be here, because the debate today is giving us the frame of interacting and exchange views. How do we answer to the key question of our conference today: Roma participation, empowerment, and emancipation. Now, I have to tell you that I haven't prepared a written speech, because I think it's much more important to feel my intervention into the subject and also listen from others what would we say about the subject of our discussion today. Now, working for the Roma Education Fund, which is almost 8 years of existence, I have to tell you that one of the greater achievements of us as a foundation, of us as activists, as NGO working in this field, I'm very happy to see many friends and Roma activists, academics, researchers in this conference room. So one of the greater achievements is that after maybe 2 decades, we have seen more and more Roma graduating higher education, including MA study, including PhDs. And I think this is maybe the greater, if we can look to the progress or to indicate what Roma managed to achieve over the 2 decades. Some of the indicators, for example, is telling us that only 2% of Roma graduate higher education. And that's a concern, and it remains a concern. And our foundation has, maybe to a small scale, has managed to contribute on a yearly basis in supporting students to graduate universities by providing them with scholarship, by providing them with fellowships in different institutions, by providing them with the opportunity to study in other countries than the countries of the origin. So we have 3 types of scholarships program that are available for the Roma students. Over 8,000 beneficiaries of us over the 8-10 years have been supported in finishing the university. And I think from my side, that's a clear indication of Roma participation and empowerment. Because Roma shouldn't be only the subject of the research or policy. They should be part of doing researches or participating in the decision-making process when it comes to policy that affects their lives. So that's one side of what I would like to say. Second, looking to the open questions from the brief that I received, how to combine the struggle against racism. And I think this remains one of the challenges that maybe we need to address, not from the past 2 decades, but maybe from the upcoming next 10 years or 20 years from now. I was attending a consultation meeting in Brussels 2 weeks ago with the international NGOs invited by Vice President Vivian Reding and by Commissioner Andor. And I was a bit astonished to notice that within the speech and the talks that we were having, it was a remark that says Roma are facing discrimination and racism in Europe, but this is not a systematic phenomenon against them. In fact, it is. In reality, it happens. And what do we understand systematic exclusion, systematic racism, systematic discrimination against Roma? For example, in Slovakia, there are clear evidence that Roma are systematically excluded from the public schools, from the mainstream schools. Over 60% of Roma are wrongly placed in schools for children with mental disabilities. And that's a clear evidence. And this is what we understand as the foundation. How do we translate systematic exclusion, systematic discrimination? And I think from this point of view, many countries in today's Europe are facing this problem. We as activists, we call it, there are different translations, but myself, I'm saying that this is what we call democratic deficit. We are not strong enough, and our society hasn't achieved a greater development in our society to ensure that at least the state institutions, public institutions, are treating equally all citizens. And if we are still lacking behind and quite an important part of our society that are living at the margin of our society from many points of view, including exclusion in labor market, access to labor market, exclusion to public education system, exclusion to public health systems, and so on. We cannot call our society being a democratic one. Because, and I will share it looking for the time and following the advice of Franju, I will share it with you one recent experience that I had visiting a Roma settlement not far from the capital of Romania, and meeting with the mothers of the children in the community. They said to me that they do not expect any help from us from us as a foundation, from us as an activist or whatever. Because at the end, they are the ones to improve their living conditions. So the power is in their hands. I was surprised because it was among few times by meeting with Roma parents that they didn't complain, they didn't ask for anything. The only thing that the mother was asking us, it was, give us the opportunity to ensure that our children are going to school. And give us the opportunity that our children are getting a job and leave us alone because we will manage to improve our living condition. So it was among few times that at that level of parents living in, I would say, not very strong or reasonable condition, but it was quite, I mean, the housing and the poverty level there, it was very, very low. And I said to myself, what could we do to empower and to ensure that those communities which are at the margin of our society are having access to participate, to enjoy what we call public life, to enjoy what we call empowerment and emancipation. And I think one of the answers to that is that we should actually strengthen the democratic institutions, strengthen the local authority. In most of the cases, mayors or elected people are not keen in ensuring a development process that will also affect Roma communities or Roma settlements. At the next level, at the regional level, for example, those who are holding the power, the public institutions' power, they are the same racists in most of the cases, not all of the cases. And at the national level, I would say the governments, if they are not pushed by the Commission or by the Parliament, by the European Parliament, to take steps in ensuring Roma inclusion, they will not do much, if not anything. Because if I look back to previous time when country was under the accession process, there was, from a political point of view, stimulated to take steps. But now, I hope that with the national strategies and the frame of the Commission, be much more demanding from the point of view that governments provides clear evidence, not only on a commitment side, but also on the progress. So my last word will be that I'm very happy to see that more and more people from our community are getting access to higher education. More and more people graduate universities, graduate postgraduate studies. And in the room we have, I would say, a small minority of researchers. People that belongs to the community and knows the problem from inside. Because it's very easy to say how Roma are, but I think it's more important that Roma themselves are saying how the problems should be solved. And I think that would be the contribution of today's conference. Thank you for listening.
If I could call the Commissioner, László Andor. Andor is from Hungary, so he's come home today from Brussels, but this is also his home in the sense that you used to teach there in the past.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. The European Commission is determined to do everything in its remit to bring about changes for the Roma people and community. We have committed to a long-term approach to achieve sustainable results. That's why I was very happy to accept the invitation to this conference, and I would like to congratulate the organizers. This is indeed my home university where I studied and also worked. And I have a written speech. for several reasons. One of them is that shortly after this event it will also be on the Commission website and hopefully give evidence not just to the participants of this conference but also for the wider community of research activists or specialists about the activities and the orientation of the Commission. I'm sure many of you here know the situation very well. Between 10 and 12 million Roma people live in Europe, more than half of them in EU member states, and 8 out of 10 Roma households in the European Union are at risk of poverty. Only around 1 in 3 working-age Roma are in employment. As you know, there is a crisis in Europe, very high unemployment, and altogether about 120 million people in the European Union face poverty or social exclusion one way or another. But the situation when we speak about the Roma people is obviously not only about this, there is another dimension also. Based on the Amnesty International's recent study, 3/4 of Europeans recognize that the Roma are at risk of discrimination. In 2012, 34% of Europeans believed that citizens in their country would feel uncomfortable, and only 28% said they would feel fairly comfortable if their children had Roma schoolmates. While at the same time 53% of them believe society would benefit from better integration of Roma. We are all aware of the challenges and hardships many Roma have to face in their daily lives. But we are at the same time aware that Roma inclusion is a key demographic as well as economic opportunity for Europe. Therefore, the European Union has laid down a strong framework for action on Roma integration, and member states have drawn up national strategies for Roma inclusion. The submission of national Roma strategies and the nomination of national Roma contact points who are in charge of coordinating their implementation has been an important step in strengthening the commitment of national governments and the quality of the national initiatives. The objective is to end discrimination and to reduce the gap between Roma and the rest of the society by improving access to education, employment, healthcare and housing. Now, it is important to make sure the policies the member states have committed to are implemented on the ground. To help this, the Commission has initiated a strong and regular dialogue with the member states to discuss the detailed assessment of the national strategies and possible ways forward, including through the improved use of EU funds for Roma inclusion in the 2014 to 20 programming period. Without, however, mainstreaming, Roma-specific measures are not sustainable. The Commission therefore also monitors member states' efforts towards Roma integration within the Europe 2020 framework. The Commission undertakes an annual cycle of evaluation for the European semester process, aiming at checking the progress towards the fulfillment of the Europe 2020 targets, among others in the field of employment, poverty and education. As part of this process, the Commission has put forward country-specific recommendations, giving operational guidance to member states when preparing the budgetary policies and structural reforms to be enacted over the coming 12 months in order to boost competitiveness and facilitate job creation. The basis for these recommendations is a thorough assessment of the implementations of measures adopted last year, combined with a detailed analysis of the national reform programs submitted by the member states. For member states with a sizable Roma population, making progress towards the Europe 2020 employment, social inclusion and education targets requires addressing the situation of Roma in the national reform programs. Within this framework, in 2012, Bulgaria, Hungary and Slovakia received country-specific recommendations which contain references to Roma. The Czech Republic and Romania were also requested to pay special attention to Roma. This year, the Commission reinforced its commitment to addressing measures for the integration of disadvantaged groups, a few times explicitly referring to the need of Roma integration. In the current European semester exercise, the Commission has proposed to strengthen and further refine recommendations relevant for Roma inclusion for the most concerned member states. As a result, we have proposed country-specific recommendations on Roma inclusion for 5 member states: Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Hungary, Romania, and Slovakia. These recommendations, on the one hand, address the implementation of national Roma integration strategies, aiming to ensure their effective delivery, including through better coordination between stakeholders, namely in the case of Romania, the allocation of sufficient funding, Romania and Bulgaria, the establishment of a monitoring mechanism for measuring the impact of actions for Bulgaria, and mainstreaming Roma inclusion goals in all policy fields for Hungary. And on the other hand, specific policy developments were also outlined in the field of education, especially the need to ensure effective access to quality inclusive mainstream education in all 5 countries, and in the field of employment, promoting activation measures and supporting transition to the labour market, particularly for Hungary and Slovakia. Ladies and gentlemen, discrimination is contrary to fundamental values of the EU and is widely prohibited in the EU treaties, the Charter of Fundamental Rights, and also secondary EU law. In EU law, the Racial Equality Directive specifically prohibits discrimination on grounds of racial or ethnic origin in a number of areas. The Roma, as a specifically vulnerable group, are obvious beneficiaries of the protection provided by this directive. This directive has been transposed into national law by all member states. The Commission has been monitoring this transposition process very closely to ensure that national anti-discrimination legislation is in line with EU requirements. Generally speaking, the problem is not the national legislation as such, but how it is implemented and applied on the ground. The Member States have the primary responsibility for implementing, applying, and complying with the directive to its full extent and consistency. However, the Commission, as a guardian of the EU legal order and of the obligations stemming from the treaties and from the legal instruments adopted on their basis, has monitoring on this. Over the past more than 5 years, we have confronted a series of cases and complaints related to its implementation at grassroots level. We continue to take action. The Member State is found to be in breach of its obligations under the directive, including the obligation to effectively implement and enforce the law. The Commission is currently investigating Roma-specific situation in some member states that may imply breaches of the Racial Equality Directive, in some as regarding housing, in others as regards education. And later this year, the Commission will report on the implementation of this directive and will focus on how it is implemented and applied within the member states. Ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn to the question of funding. Because the European Social Fund is the EU's main financial instrument of investment in people and in social and policy reform to put policies into place, Roma inclusion is and will be a key investment area for the ESF and supported also by other EU funds. The ESF has been and will be used, for example, to create access for Roma families in disadvantaged neighborhoods through early childhood education and care, helping their integration through education in the crucial first years of school, to provide extracurricular activities for Roma children to prevent early school leaving and increase attainment levels of Roma people, to provide microcredits and business support services for Roma social entrepreneurs, and to provide training, labor search support for Roma job seekers. In 2011, member states supported more than 500,000 participants in ESF programs with a minority background, including Roma. I would like to mention two very good examples. The Acceder program is managed by the Secretariado Gitano Foundation in Spain. The main priority of their program is to ensure Roma people's access to the labour market, thus promoting equal opportunities. Roma access to the labour market is processed mainly through labour integration actions such as individual employment itineraries and the improvement of human resources. And another example is from Romania, called Romano Shares Social Cooperative, which aims to support traditional Roma craftsmen who can often find themselves excluded from the labour market. The project has created 500 permanent jobs. Due to sustainability, innovative approach and multiplication of beneficial effects in the entrepreneurial community, this project was one of the 10 nominees at the European Social Innovation Awards ceremony in Brussels just a few days ago. The country-specific recommendations form an essential part of the evaluation and identification of the priorities of the European Social and Investment Funds, including Roma inclusion. In line with the CSRs, the Commission Services position papers have identified the expected funding priorities of the Member States in the future programming period. Pursuing this objective, Commission Services are now in informal dialogue with the national authorities. They expect the proposed funding priorities, including on the integration of marginalized Roma, are translated into concrete funding priorities. The Commission would also like to ensure that investment in people, in social and employment policies and in social inclusion is adequately prioritized by all Member States. That's why we propose that at least 25% of the future cohesion policy budget should come under the ESF, and that a minimum of 20% of ESF resources are to be allocated to thematic objectives and social inclusion, which of course includes investment in support of Roma. At the same time, available funding alone, of course, cannot be a guarantee for success. Efficiency is also crucial. Key factors here are the real involvement and the capacity of stakeholders in the implementation of programs. The fund will make a contribution in this, firstly through partnerships, which is a key guiding principle of the European Structural Investment Fund. At the same time, partnership is, in our view, a source of effectiveness. The Commission funds are meant to support policies which have been designed with the involvement of stakeholders, including the Roma civil society, which are implemented through their active participation and followed up with them jointly. The principle of nothing about us without us has to be ensured throughout the whole process. But secondly, the Commission has proposed that there be funding available for the capacity building of non-governmental organizations to strengthen their participation in and access to ESF actions. Thirdly, the administrative burden on beneficiaries should be decreased. The Commission has therefore proposed simplified cost options, which should be mandatory in case of small projects. And fourthly, the EU must follow up that the commitments to Roma inclusion are effective and Member States make steps for the implementation. The Commission has proposed an ex-ante conditionality, meaning that the precondition for accessing funds is the adoption of a framework for Roma integration initiatives. And finally, let me turn to the important role, indeed, of the local authorities and local civil society, the role they play in implementing the proposed measures on the ground. However, their capacity to design and obtain funding for and implement Roma inclusion measures is not adequate in countries with large Roma minorities. Particularly in this context, I welcome the efforts of the partners of the Coalition of International Organizations for Roma Inclusion Some major donors and other international organizations are now working together to find real solutions. To achieve this aim, the coalition partners are endeavoring to get their initiatives to mesh and work together, in particular so that local authorities are able to design and implement on the ground Roma inclusion measures. The Commission is determined to use its resources to support the coalition in its efforts to give local authorities the support they need. Ladies and gentlemen, the expectation to have tangible results on the ground is high, and the Commission is ready to respond to support Member States deliver on their commitments on Roma people. The Commission will adopt soon its second report on assessing progress made by the Member States in setting the necessary preconditions for a successful implementation of the strategies. These preconditions are involving regional and local authorities, working closely with civil society, allocating proportionate financial resources, monitoring and enabling policy adjustment, and fighting against discrimination. And jointly with the 2013 Progress Report, the Commission will put forward a proposal for a Council recommendation to enhance the effectiveness of measures to achieve successful Roma integration. The proposal has been fed by the work done within the network of the national contact points and will provide more support and guidance to the Member States to achieve. It is unquestionable that wide cooperation with concerned parties besides the national Roma contact point is absolutely important. The Commission has built on the valuable contribution of civil society coming on the one hand from civil society coalitions organized by the Decade of Roma Inclusion Secretariat and networks such as Eurocities, and on the other hand, from individual contributions from civil society, experts, and other stakeholders. The valuable inputs received from these organizations show the crucial role that Roma civil society should continue to play in both the implementation and the monitoring of national Roma inclusion efforts. I am confident that today's event will open debates and will also help us to move forward towards effective Roma inclusion policies. Participation and empowerment is indeed the way forward. I count on your support to reach out to Roma and channel back the voices and aspirations to the policymakers at all levels. Thank you very much for your attention.
So thank you very much for that, László. I'd like to call Ágnes shortly. For those of you from outside Hungary who don't know Ágnes, she's a very well-known figure in grassroots activism and in cultural promotion of Roma. But I'm sure there are quite a lot of you actually outside Hungary who do know that. So anyway, I'll let Ágnes take the floor.
Commissioner, Vice Rector, because we have two mother tongue, Romanian and Hungarian also, and I knew what does it mean to speak a language perfect. So my English is very weak, unfortunately, and I wrote my thesis in Hungarian, so probably Marco really can help me. Vice President of the European Commission began having told some days ago after a Roma meeting, the laws that we need to prevent discrimination of Roma are there. What is not functioning is integration. I deeply agree with Vice President of the European Commission. The laws are there. But to get a real success, it means that the control and the interest representation also have to be there. And today, there isn't. Instead of speaking about inclusion, integration, and assimilation, from 2006, with my husband, János Bársony, who is also here, we began to speak and to think about emancipation. And I'm very grateful that this conference is also using this very new, on this field and in this case, this very new but very progressive word and thinking, emancipation. Because the Roma aren't equal in their own countries. The Roma aren't equal in Europe. That's the very simple situation. And when we search for the reason, for the very fundamentals, the reason is the lack of democracy and the fight for sources, for financial sources, to divide the societies into two parts and to dismiss or to take out the Roma means the more sources the others will have. So, from one side, to speak and to think about emancipation means we have to recognize it and to speak very clearly and to use the same thinking, the same words, and to acknowledge, not only with the Roma minority, but also with the majority. Yes, we know what you know. Also, we know what you know. And what about is everything. But at the same time, when we want emancipation, a real one, we do need in our societies the ethos of equal rights, the ethos of human rights, to have a living ethos. And that's not a question this or that. Only those two in one time and from both sides to have to be built. Because democracy is a colorful and very different from one side, but equal for everybody. Václav Havel said, the litmus paper of human rights is the situation of the Roma in our societies. Yes, because all the other minorities do have their own countries. And the minority policies are based on those bilateral exchange and probably kölcsönös zsarolás politikája. Hangosan mondják.
Mutual blackmail.
That's it. But the Roma have no home country, and there is no background who can fight for us. And when we analyze the real situation, we have to say, now we face ethnocide. Népírtás. It's very simple, but name it. Please name it. Speak clearly. And I don't think about culture, about the lack of institutions, about the forced assimilation tendencies which kills our language and culture. Oh no. I see a much more deeper problem, because the lack of everyday eating touched more than 2/3 of Roma communities. The unemployment between Roma is 7-8 times larger as by the majority population. In winter time, we have to decide if we eat or we will frozen. And don't think that that's a new law, let's say in Hungary. This law was made by social liberals. And it means, again, 2/3 of the Roma population face problems to use the social care system. And infections and disaster case to the by. TBC, it's again tuberculosis, it's again a népbetegség.
A national disease.
National disease. Who will stop it? Who will stop it? You are thinking that a disease can stop by the fences of the Roma settlements? I don't think so. But if you search for the reasons why is this situation today, you can't forget that in our countries, in former Soviet Union empire countries, the so-called Roma question is seen as national security problem. Until today, national security problem. And the permanent fight between political parties, it's so deep and strong that they aren't able to cooperate and to build national minimums. We do need such minimums, but we don't have. And in such a situation, the economical crisis take from us scapegoats. If you see the European subsidiarity is a well-known and used European view. But subsidiarity in case of Roma is used against us. In Hungary, I tell you the situation, it's very frankly the same as just before the fascism. To care the unemployment, it's delegated to local authorities. To care the socially needy or in poverty living people, it's delegated to the local authorities. At the same time, the local authorities don't get enough sources to care all these problems, and they, on daily basis, have to decide this is a good and this is not. It will survive, this family will not. And they make it, and they don't need to be racist. It's enough the lack of sources. In this daily fight, the Roma have not enough power to fight for their own rights for their own interests. And at the same time, our governments don't want to see us. They speak about colorblind policy, which is a lie. Because they see us as we are searching for jobs, but we don't get. That's the reason why 7-8 times is larger the unemployment between Roma. They see us as there is about segregated schools. And they see us as there is about Romani Mahalas, where the situation is in the third world. But our governments don't want to see us as there is about sources, as there is about money, as there is about EU funds. The National Controller Bureau, Állami Számvevőszék, made us research, and they showed out that only 10% of the invested money arrived in reality to Roma. It means our governments, and not only this, but also the former governments, had a policy to blame the victims, to announce that we are responsible, we aren't able to develop. But the reality, 10% of the money arrived. 10% only. And that's why 12 Roma organizations coming from neighborhood countries on the occasion of 8 April International Roma Day, when a commissioner came to Bodvalenka, to the Freshco village. So our civil organizations made a declaration, which is the Bodvalenka Declaration, and we asked some and proposals we made. Let's name only 4 from them. The Commission initiates infringement procedures against member states, not only when they say exceed the 3% budgetary deficit, but also when they violate the non-discrimination directive and the equal rights regulations. Transparency in all processes so as to enable us to call our own governments to account on the implementation of their Roma strategies. The setting up of a Roma fund managed directly by the Commission and accessible for Roma NGOs. The direct involvement of Roma civil society in the design, implementation, monitoring, and evaluation all Roma-related programs in the 2014-2020 programming period. That's our wish, because we see exactly in all and in every single good example, Roma and Roma's civil society is deeply involved. So we know how to make it better. We know what does it mean, good results. And not only for the minority, but also for majority. But we do not have sources and emancipation. Thank
you. Okay, it's my pleasure now to introduce to you Will Guy from the University of Bristol. I hope you won't mind me introducing him as a historic figure, because he was at the 1971 World Romani Congress with Thomas Acton, of course, who's also here. So, Will, if you'd like to take the floor, please. thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. It's a great honour to be able to speak to you. I'll probably try and cut some of what I'm going to say, because I hope there will be enough time for some questions and answers to the panel. And we have a press conference coming after. Okay, the focus of this session is meant to be the lessons of EU involvement in the social inclusion of Roma. So I'd like to raise a few doubts about whether lessons have been learned from my experience as an evaluator over the years. And I started researching Roma in 1969 and Roma issues. But more recently I was lead author on this 18-country comparative report on good practice in 18 member states. Okay, the current EU framework for national Roma integration strategies has its distant origin in the EU enlargement process, starting in the late 1990s, when the criterion for EU membership was respect for minorities, one Copenhagen criteria. And through the PHAR programme, the EU helped fund programmes to integrate Roma, and so enable CEE, Central and Eastern European candidate countries to meet the entry criteria. But in spite of heavy investment, the situation of Roma communities had barely improved by the time their home countries were due to become EU members. So since 2000, I worked as an evaluator, project evaluator, Roma projects for the European Commission, and I was also joint author of a thematic review of PHAR programmes in Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. And we found that PHAR had put Roma on the agenda, raised the political profile of Roma, and had given officials and their organisations well, some valuable experience. But the downside was the programmes had little impact or sustainability, usually too short-term to make a significant difference. More disturbing was the fact that lessons weren't being learnt by member states and mistakes were being repeated year after year. Also, there was no Roma involvement to speak of. Just to give you one example, we went repeatedly to the Slovak Ministry of Education and asked them what their plans were, and they would say X% of Roma children will go to kindergarten. And we said, yes, but X% of what? What's your baseline? And their answer was, we are not allowed by law to collect ethnically desegregated statistics, therefore we have no baseline. So we said, well, how do you measure this? And wrote in our report, this is unmeasurable. The next year we came back and it was exactly the same. And we couldn't see any effect of our reports to the European Commission. More worrying was when we went to local situations to check out really what was happening in practice, and we found quite often that there was huge variation in this, not much control, and often EU funding was being used to support segregated education. Strictly speaking, the candidate countries could have been refused entry to the EU, but this didn't happen. The plight of the Roma was not going to interrupt the political goal of an expanding Europe, but it would hardly have helped Roma to have been identified and blamed as the reason for their state's exclusion. Nevertheless, the period of enlargement negotiations was a missed opportunity for the EU to apply greater pressure on candidate countries to improve the lives of their Roma citizens. And I will now skip a bit. Now, a broad framework has been proposed with the European Commission in the role of facilitator of specifically tailored national plans proposed and implemented by governments. This continued like regulatory touch of the Lisbon strategy, where a consensual approach has been adopted using the open method of coordination, which is a mutual process of planning, monitoring, examination and comparison on the basis of common objectives, and where sharing experience and good practice were encouraged by peer review exercises. Nevertheless, there are tensions, if not inconsistencies, at the heart of this situation, for diversity in member states and problems does not prevent the EU directly intervening in economic affairs. In the most striking example, in imposing conditions for bailouts on Greece, Portugal, and more recently Cyprus. There was a disheartening progress report from the European Commission about Roma in 2008 on Roma integration, but it also published another report which drew less attention on the possible future modification of the open method of coordination, which had significant implications for its stance on governance in relation to Roma issues. And basically, this report stated that member states would not allow their own jurisdiction over social policy issues to be removed. And so consequently, the Commission recommended pursuing the current approach of disseminating examples of good practice and encouraging member states to utilise available structural funding as part of a general drive to reduce social exclusion. But the key question of sanctions, should plans fail to be realised, remains unanswered. And although I hope to hear some really positive examples in the next panel, and I've heard some reassurances from Commissioner Andor, there are signs of a very familiar pattern emerging of poor performance, severely underutilised funding, and lack of adequate cooperation with Roma organisations and communities, who are the intended beneficiaries of the measures. Unlike the sanctions, as I said, imposing control of failing economies, there seems to be little or no retribution for failure to make progress in effectively promoting Roma inclusion. And we heard from Commissioner Andor that they are actively pursuing breaches of the race directive. So again, I look forward to hearing something about this. But this has been incorporated in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights and has become legally binding with the new EU Lisbon Treaty. But even when funds are utilised, it is sometimes impossible to identify whether they've been used correctly. In the recent programming period, right up till 2013, so a recent UNDP report studied a large Slovak programme claiming that Roma were beneficiaries. This is for deprived regions of Slovakia. But again, these could not be quantified. And one example was a car park European funds were used to fund a car park on the grounds that Roma used car parks. And how many Roma used this, there was no measure, etc. In recent years, there have been very disturbing developments which have a severe impact on the context of Roma inclusion. Hate crime and speech, financial crisis, and Roma migration. It's not hard to see why the massive expenditure necessary to improve the situation of Roma would be a hard sell to a generally hostile majority population at a time of widespread economic hardship. But even leaving this problem aside, a major stumbling block has been the opposition of mainstream politicians who at election time cynically set out to win votes by exploiting the space created by the discourse of extremists to convey similar messages in coded form, for example, highlighting the damage to the economy created by welfare dependency. So we know a lot about and hear a lot about hate speech, but what is really frightening is the support, the tacit support this has from mainstream politicians. And some have even actually built careers on this. I'll give an example from the Czech Republic, where a mayor of Szczecin in northern Moravia expelled Roma from the centre of the town. He described this as freeing the town of an ulcer, and he then stood for the Senate and was elected with over 70% of the vote. Did this do him any harm locally? No. Did it do him any harm nationally? He went on to be vice chair of the Christian Democrats, again not an extremist party, and Deputy Prime Minister. And if we think about the Czech Republic and the DH case, this is segregation, which was condemned in schools, which was condemned by the European Court of Human Rights. And the Czechs were given, the government was given 3 years to actually produce evidence that it was taking steps to improve the situation. And after 3 years, they came back basically just saying, well, we have an action plan. And the advisors to the Education Ministry, who were all in support of greater inclusion, resigned in protest. So you wonder what you can expect from these sorts of governments. I'll just say a few words about migration. It's a huge subject, but it was the migration of Romanian and Bulgarian Roma to Italy and France that spurred the EU into action, highlighted by the row between Commissioner Reding and France over the key directives of the freedom of women and race equality. But continued Roma migration may well heighten anti-Roma feeling in Western Europe, and present in the UK we have a sort of moral panic about immigrants coming, not Roma immigrants, we had that in 2004, but just general immigrants. And so this is a sort of Europe-wide phenomenon. But I'd just like to say that migration can have its positive aspects, and many activists would argue that remittances from Romanian Roma, especially abroad, sent home to their villages, have far greater impact than any EU-funded program has ever had. So in conclusion, I just want to say that the situation of Roma in recent reports produced by the UNDP, by Phralipe, and by the World Bank show a dire and worsening situation, and unless effective action is taken, things will only get worse. So therefore, I think the Commission does have to play a very active role in scrutinising and holding Member States to account. Otherwise, well, the outcomes, the prospects for the future are too frightening to behold. Thank you very much. So, our next and final speaker is from the Open Society Foundation. I'd like to introduce you to Zeljko Jovanovic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the organizers. This is an important topic, and it is, in my view, critical for the future, much more critical than EU funds and pilot projects, etc. So, since you are, many of you here, academics and scholars and practitioners, I would offer a conceptual framework on Roma empowerment that we use in our work. As you know, I'm working with Open Society Foundations. I'm primarily grants maker, and our role is to support Roma empowering themselves, not being empowered by others. So, as you all noticed in recent years, there is a lot of talk about Roma empowerment. The term empowerment, if not the whole concept, has been greatly used and to some degree abused. We many times say empowerment, but we think about employment. We many times say empowerment, but we say personal documents. We many times say empowerment, but we say, in fact, stipends for students. We many times say empowerment, but we think social welfare. Well, I don't dispute that investment in a person's development is part of empowerment. It is far away from the full-scale empowerment, especially empowerment of the whole community that we speak about, the community of, as scholars say, between 10 and 12 million Roma people in Europe. Now, as you are much better in theory and science than me, we all know that we have to define the term empowerment. And I believe that its roots need to be defined through the notion of power. In my view, and I use some sort of a working definition of the word power by defining it as the ability to achieve your objectives with the least possible power and effort. So, power in this way can reside in many different sources of power. Roma, as you all know, never used, nor that they have, military power. We speak many times about poverty, and our economic power is yet limited. However, the one source that nobody else but Roma can use is the political power, the power of the Roma vote. And I'm not speaking here about Roma standing as candidates. I'm speaking about Roma standing up as voters. Now, why this is a topic that it's not many times discussed? Because those who practice politics every day know that Roma have considerable voting power in many communities across Europe, not only in Central Eastern Europe. In some places they can decide whether left or right is in power. In some places they can constitute a government. And in some places in the region they can rule the government, at least local government. Now, we also need to consider the power relations. As I noted at the beginning, we speak about individual empowerment. What a person can, or what the person believes that she can, which is the self-confidence, ability, knowledge, skills. However, this is one phase of empowerment only. The second phase is what people can do among themselves. In other words, what Roma can do with each other, collectively. As a collective agency that goes into a certain direction, which is self-determined. And the third relationship, or the aspect of power, is what Roma do and how they interact with those having power over them, and decide about their lives, decide about the distribution of the taxation that they also contribute to, and decide about the EU funds. Now, in my understanding, in my own framework, one working on empowerment needs to consider all three aspects: the individual development or empowerment, empowerment of a collective force, as well as the interaction between those we empower and those that rule the power over them. Now, of course, we have to speak about the purpose of having power or exercising power. If it's for the power's sake, this is not what, at least myself, and I believe many of you here, believe. Somebody mentioned austerity. We all speak about financial crisis. in my view, that's not an excuse. If there are limited resources, they should be equally limited for everybody. In my view, the crisis is an opportunity for those in power to redefine the distribution of resources and distribution of power. Obviously, the system of power relations that we had for many years has led us to the crisis that we witness this day. So, since the distribution of power and resources should ultimately influence everyday Roma people, in my view, Roma is not a social issue. In my view, Roma issue is a political issue par excellence, because it is about how we govern our societies and how we share the resources in our society. So, how much Roma can impact the decisions over distribution of public services and resources, that's the measurement of Roma empowerment. How well we supported Roma empowerment can be measured, in my view, whether Roma influence the public decisions and public resources. However, I have to say to my colleagues, activists, leaders, intellectuals, power is not given, because when somebody gives you something, it can be easily taken. So, democracy defines institution in which we can negotiate or renegotiate power relations. And we ourselves, as the Roma people, we need to use that. Other people did that in much graver situation. We don't live in slavery, and we don't live in apartheid, at least officially declared apartheid. So I'm certain that we can do it ourselves. However, for our non-Roma friends, it is critical to work with us to remove the obstacles for more Roma being empowered, taking decisions for their own lives, and engaging with those who have power over them. So, the first change must start from us, the Roma, and how we speak, how we perceive, and how we act. We need to start from what we have, not what we don't have. We need to speak about the Roma middle class, which in these discussions is not visible, but it doesn't mean it is inexistent. We simply don't know how to work with these people. We need to start with the resource of our power, which is, as I said, the voting. It is a considerable power. Majority parties know that, and majority parties use that, but they use it against Roma. I will close with reflecting on some of the key words that were mentioned in many speeches in the last 2-3 years at the European and national levels. These three phrases, not the key words, are local level, EU funds, national integration strategies. I would like us to think deeper than these phrases. And I guess that the purpose of this conference is also about that. As you all know, in the austerity times, many governments centralize the power. Speaking about local level might be meaningless when a local administration has no competence, when local administration is almost bankrupt. So the changes must be made at every level, not at local level. Then EU funds, we witnessed all, can in many times be an autogol. Announcing funds for Roma increases hatred against Roma. EU funding in dysfunctional democracies, weak public service, and patterns of high-level corruption can demonstrate no change in the lives of Roma. And at the end, as it happened already, Roma will be blamed for the failure of so-called inclusion programs. Finally, if we continue talking about national Roma integration strategies only, we will find ourselves every 5 years revising the strategies. Every 5 years documented that these strategies are already irrelevant anymore. Documented that they are weak. Documented that they are not based on the baseline data. Documented that we need indicators. Documenting that we need disaggregated data. Measures from the national integration strategies must become part of the mainstream policies. EU funds present only 0.1 of the total GDP of European Union, meaning that national funding is much greater pot. The way to access it is not through a segregated policy and segregated programs for Roma. But for this, the battlefield is at the national level. The battlefield can be won by citizenship and concentrated on what Roma can have and can exercise. And that's their own power, the voting power, by which they can exercise greater impact on decision making. And this is not only in the times of elections. It is before elections. It is after elections. It is every day, every meeting of the local assembly, where we decide as citizens, as our representatives in our name, decide about paving roads, introducing water pipes in the Roma communities, disaggregating schools, employment in public enterprises, etc., etc. We need to enter the public life, the political life, and the empowerment can be measured by that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that. And I just want to explain a bit about this panel and the others. We asked this panel of activists, leaders and scholars to provide a kind of contextual background with their 10-15-minute statements. We've got time for questions, which we will use, but the other panels, there will be much shorter presentations. The speakers have 5 minutes, and it will be much more interactive. So if you're not able to make a point in this remainder of the time we have, there's going to be plenty of time during the day. Anyway, time for questions. Martin, if I could ask you to take this microphone. Just switch on. And I have a microphone here for our panel. Okay. I'd like to pass you the microphone. Just briefly introduce yourself. Remember, questions, not long speeches, please.
From Romania, and I want to share with you that I participated to the youth platform in March 2012, and this sounds a question in my head from the document. How can we have an impact on the ground? And now we have things going on in Romania in the sense that the Roma inclusion funds, it's pretty official that they want to introduce these funds from the regional operational program. So no dialogue between the operational program and Roma NGOs. So we don't know what is happening, but we know that officially the Roma inclusion funds will go to the regional operation program. Plus we have the Prime Minister of Romania is about to fund the Parental Foundation to run the funds for Roma, even new funds, I'm not sure. Speaking about the national contact point importance, I want to to speak about this because we are revising the national strategy in Romania, and we have two parts. The national strategy for Roma that is revising actually the strategy, and the national contact point for Roma. So we are not working together. So the national contact point is participating in the European Commission's meetings, and the National Agency for Roma is revising the strategy. So we are a bit more than a bit confused in this whole process.
Can I just ask you to hold there? There's quite a lot for us to think about. I'm going to take in a few more questions, but other points you can raise in the next session, okay? Well done.
Can I use? Okay, thank you. I have one short question to Mr. Zeljko. I'm really inspired on his speech. When he mentioned about what voting power, do you mean that in that case we are speaking about political ideology based on values? And how do you think that it's possible our people to have in mind these resources of power when in our everyday life our fridge are empty? So when your fridge is empty and your stomach is also empty, you will not thinking about democracy, rights and voting power. Your everyday life is focused on how to continue next day. Thank you.
Yeah. Should we just take a few answers then? We've had two questions. Thank you very much.
So the first question was what was the
values and how
yeah. I mean, in my view, I'm not bound to ideologies. I'm bound by purpose, and that's justice and development for each person. So, I mean, ideologies are these days so watered down that you can't really always understand what is left or what is right. It is very tricky, and I would not go into that discussion. But talking about the fridge, I agree that the fridge in many Roma households is mostly empty. Some of them don't have the fridge at all. But not all Roma are like that. I think we need to reconsider our poverty label over Roma. Not all Roma are poor. I want to remind you that UNDP in 2003 found an average, let's say in Central Eastern Europe, of 40% of Roma in extreme poverty. We have to also say that 60 are not. And I also can understand that maybe 1% over 40 is also very poor, but not recorded as extreme poverty. But this is to say that we should not only speak about Roma as a category of poor. Of course, we are poorer than others, but it doesn't mean that we are all poor. Second point is that in every elections, those Roma who don't have something in their fridge, they still vote. But they vote in a manner which is not organized, and they are only exercising their citizenship during the elections. Before, significantly before the elections are announced, or after elections, this is not happening. So my point is not related whether people are poor. Yes, they are poor, but other people are poor too, and they still exercise their voting power.
Okay.
Hi. Hi, my name is David. I'm from Bulgaria. My question is to the Commissioner Andor. So, Mr. Commissioner, how comfortable do you feel having the Roma moving from target for empowerment to power holders? And are you ready to support the idea of Roma as a power holders in the next 1 year, which is left of the Commission term?
Thank you. We take that as a short question, and that's an important question as well. So I'll hand over the microphone.
Of course,
this is what we are encouraging. So that's why the concept of empowerment, in my view, is so important. Colleagues discussed that sometimes the terminology of the debates is not the same in different countries or in Brussels. So there isn't a lot of use of the expression power holders. But we always point to examples where there are Roma organizations, there are Roma MPs in the member state, because it's not the case in all the countries in this region. There are Roma MEPs who also can bring this case to the European Parliament and Brussels discussion. So all this is very important, and that's the only possible direction.
Yes, my name is Peter Moller, and I speak now as a member of the group called The Constitution is Not a Toy. And as I see in the program, there will be a press conference now. And I suppose that as sort of a precondition of any way of empowerment, you will have a word about the new constitutionalized way of segregating many, many Roma Hungarian children in Hungary under the pretext of helping them to catch up. This is a very shameful policy that has been planned here at the country of this very important conference, and I think it would be very disappointing if the press conference wouldn't have very critical words about it. So I'm asking, what do you plan, how do you plan to comment on this racist plan? Thank you.
Well, normally in the press conference we give a summary of what happened in the conference. So this is what I'm planning. Of course, if there's a question, I will certainly say that segregation is not acceptable for the European Commission. And, of course, it's a practice which has to be eliminated.
My name is Florin Astere. I'm a PhD student at the Administrative School in Political Science from Bucharest. I have a question for Zeljko and one for Mr. Andor. I agree totally with what Mr. Zeljko said. Indeed, we need to mobilize communities for voting, but my question will be, in our democracies, better to say pseudo-democracies, where everything is so politicized. I mean, from the very local level, public servants are appointed politically. Is this a real democracy? Indeed, what you said is working there. If we have the voting power, then things can be changed and the Roma communities will be empowered. But you know, how can this work in a real democracy? Because in my opinion, what we have in our countries, in Central and Eastern European countries, is not a real democracy. Because, as you know, I'm sure you know, I participated helping one of my friends in getting elected at the local level. This is not democracy. When you buy votes, when you do what the politicians do in our countries, this is not a real democracy. This is one question. My second question will be to Mr. László Andor. It's very nice that this principle of the decade. For 10 years we had this principle that says Roma, nothing about Roma without Roma. But this is a dream, to be honest, because the policies for Roma are done by non-Roma or by Roma who don't have anything to do with Roma community. Sorry to say that. Only few Roma, they know the realities from Roma communities. So, as you said, we need to get the power somehow, the Roma. Okay. So, how can we Roma engage with the national governments and the European Commission? So this is my two questions.
Thank you very much. That's going to be the last question, because the copy break and networking is important. It's important you refresh yourselves. So I'd like you to make some very brief comments, please, László and Zeljko.
Well, the fact that in various organizations, advocacy groups, international bodies, there are many non-Roma people who want to support the case of Roma integration and justice and development should not be a problem, because these people have the resources and influence on many decisions, and without this help, I think the situation on the ground will not improve. But at the same time, we also have to support as much as possible the autonomous movements, organizations, education, and then ensure that we will have a lot more Roma leaders who themselves will continue this work. So I don't see really a contradiction, because the conclusion would be that those who are not Roma should stop working on this, whether they are in the European Union, or whether they are in the Open Society Institute, or the World Bank, or elsewhere. I don't think this would be the right conclusion.
Thank you. So, Zeljko, last comment, then we move to the copy.
Very shortly. Everything is politicized. Yes. And? Well, I mean, what is the proposition? What is the alternative? Can anybody propose an alternative? In my view, the civil society approach that we have used by now has reached its glass ceiling. We succeeded to have the European Union commit on Roma. We succeeded governments maybe making promises for Roma. The next step is what? Allocation of funding for the implementation of these policies. Their approach that civil society has, at least now, cannot succeed in the politicized environment that you are talking about. So practically, there is no alternative. So civil society must learn how to organize citizens as voters. There is nothing, I'm not talking here about political parties. I'm talking here about people and their rights. And second was related. The question was related about how you work with the European Commission and national governments. I mean, the Commissioner Andor is not a commissioner because he came to ask as an NGO, can I be a commissioner? He was backed up by his political party. He was involved in politics for many years. He was building his statue. And then you say, come and ask, can I work with you? Yes, but your influence is very limited then.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's give our panel a final.